Greetings, you wonderfully curious mind, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. I'm Hari, and I'm absolutely thrilled you're joining us again today.
And hello from me, Kimi. It's great to be here, ready to explore another fascinating piece of history with you all.
So before we jump in, I heard about some butter that just got promoted the other day.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, apparently it's now the head churn. Ah. Oh, okay, I'll promise to stick to history now. Today, we're diving deep into the life of William D. Hoard.
Ah, yes, the 16th governor of Wisconsin, born way back on October 10th, 1836, in Munnsville, New York, and passed away November 22nd, 1918.
Exactly. And we've got, well, quite a range of sources to draw on for this. Letters, articles, historical accounts. It's pretty rich material.
It really is. Our aim today is, to get a handle on his pretty significant impact, especially on Wisconsin's agriculture, but also to touch on his political career, which had its share of controversy.
Let's start right at the beginning then.
Yeah.
His early life seems quite foundational. His father, for instance, was a blacksmith, but also an itinerant Methodist minister.
Right, and he even preached to the Oneida people. That suggests a certain breadth of experience, doesn't it? Different worlds colliding almost.
And then there's his grandfather, Enos. He sounds like quite the influence. Built the schoolhouse William attended.
A one-room log schoolhouse, no less. And crucially, Enos had a library. Think about that. A personal library back then. That likely sparked Hoard's love for reading.
You'd think so. And it seems Enos also gave him his first taste of the dairy world, taking him along when buying cattle.
And here's a little fun fact. By the time he was 16, Hoard wasn't just watching, he was actually learning cheese making and butter making.
From a neighbor, right, Waterman Simons.
That's the one. So hands-on experience quite early, and even as a young farmhand back in New York, he was apparently noticing things.
Like the soil depletion from constant wheat farming.
Exactly. He saw the land getting worn out. It seems like that observation really foreshadowed his later push towards dairy farming as a more sustainable option.
Which brings us to his move. He heads to Wisconsin in 1857. Initially, was he thinking of following his father's path into the ministry?
It seems so, yeah. He started studying to become a Methodist minister, but, and this is maybe a less known part of his story, he ran into some, let's call them ideological conflicts.
So he didn't finish the studies?
No, he abandoned them, and for the next 3 years, he kind of bounced around a bit, worked as a woodchopper, even taught singing lessons for a while.
Singing teacher. Interesting. Quite a change. And then he married Agnes Elizabeth Bragg in 1860.
Starting that new chapter just before, well, the whole country changed with the Civil War.
Right. And Hoard enlisted. He was apparently a strong supporter of Lincoln and the Union. Started as a fife player.
Yes. In the 4th Wisconsin Infantry Regiment, he was even involved in the capture of New Orleans.
But his service was interrupted.
It was. He got sick while pursuing Confederate forces and received a discharge. But his commitment seems to have been pretty strong because he didn't stay out for long.
He re-enlisted.
Yeah, he joined Battery A of the 1st New York Light Artillery Battalion and served right through until the war ended in 1865.
And after the war, he tried his hand at farming again, this time in Columbus, Wisconsin. Hops, wasn't it?
It was hops, but that didn't quite pan out. The market price collapsed, apparently, so another early struggle, really.
It shows his path wasn't exactly smooth. But then comes 1870, and he moves into publishing, acquires the Jefferson County Union in Lake Mills.
And this is where things really start to take shape for his later influence. He didn't just run a small local paper, he actively worked to expand its reach.
Which went against the grain a bit, right?
Yeah.
Small papers were more the norm.
Definitely. And an interesting detail, those first editions were actually printed under contract by the Watertown Republican. A sort of collaborative start.
What really stood out, though, was his use of the editorial page, wasn't it?
Absolutely. That wasn't standard practice for small papers then. He used it as a platform, really pushing for more scientific approaches to agriculture.
And that's where the dairy focus starts to emerge. He started a specific dairy column in 1872.
He did, clearly signaling where his interests were heading. But, it wasn't all smooth sailing. Well, he faced some skepticism. Some of the established farmers apparently called him a book farmer.
Suggesting he was all theory and no dirt under his fingernails.
Kind of, yeah. Lacked that perceived hands-on Wisconsin experience, maybe. But he kept at it.
And then came the big step, Hoard's Dairyman. It started as a supplement.
Right, in 1885. Encouraged by his son Arthur and another publisher, Ed Coe, it was initially just a folio added to the main newspaper.
But it took off.
It really did, so much so that by 1889, it became its own separate magazine, totally focused on dairy.
And its reach became pretty incredible, didn't it? that fun fact about circulation.
Oh, yeah. By 1924, it hit 75,000 in circulation. And not just in the U.S., it had international readers, too. It essentially became the first truly nationwide agricultural publication in the States.
That's quite something. But his influence wasn't just through publishing, was it? He was involved in organizing farmers, too.
Very much so. He was a key player in co-founding the Wisconsin Dairymen's Association, the WDA, back in 1872.
And they had some clear goals from the start.
Three main ones. First, just creating a space for dairy farmers to talk, share ideas, discuss problems. Second, dealing with cheese surpluses and, critically, tackling high railroad freight rates.
Transport was a huge issue then.
Huge. And their third goal was actively marketing Wisconsin dairy products, especially to those big East Coast markets.
And Hoard himself got involved in tackling those freight rates.
Directly. The WDA sent him to Chicago in 1874, specifically to negotiate with the railroads. He was pushing for lower rates and, crucially, for refrigerated cars.
Which you absolutely needed for cheese traveling long distances.
Exactly, and he succeeded. Got the rate down to just 1 cent per pound. That was a massive boost for Wisconsin cheese production. It really took off after that.
And that led to national recognition. The Centennial Exhibition in Philadelphia in '76.
Right. The WDA was invited to show their stuff. Apparently, they felt a bit snubbed initially by the National Association, but Hoard rallied them, and Wisconsin products ended up winning something like 20 awards.
Wow. Really put Wisconsin dairy on the map.
It certainly did, and the WDA kept pushing. They lobbied successfully against things like skim and filled cheese, those imitation products.
These is undermining the real deal, I suppose.
Precisely. They also championed farmers' institutes, those traveling educational programs bringing science to the farm gate. And, of course, their role in establishing the College of Agriculture at the University of Wisconsin was pivotal.
Including the very first dairy school in the U.S. in 1890.
That's right. A huge step for formalizing dairy education.
Now, you mentioned imitation products. Hoard had strong feelings about oleomargarine, didn't he?
Oh, very strong. He saw it as, well, basically fraud, especially when it was colored yellow to look like butter, a direct threat to dairy farmers' livelihoods.
So he fought against it.
He did. He founded the National Dairy Union in 1894, largely for that purpose. He campaigned relentlessly for higher taxes on colored margarine.
He even testified before Congress.
Multiple times between 1898 and 1902. His efforts were a big part of why the Oleomargarine Act of 1902 passed, which did impose that higher tax.
Interesting. Okay, let's pivot a bit to his political career. It started before he became governor, right? Some smaller roles.
Yeah, briefly a deputy U.S. Marshal in 1870. There's a story from that time about him encountering a German immigrant family struggling with English, which might have subtly shaped his later views on education.
And he was sergeant-at-arms for the state senate, too.
In 1872, so he was getting familiar with the political scene, but it was really his reputation as an agricultural speaker that boosted his profile statewide.
He became quite popular in farming communities.
Hugely popular. So much so that when the 1888 Republican Convention came around, despite no clear frontrunner initially, his name surfaced, and the agricultural support was so strong he got the nomination unanimously.
And Robert La Follette, who was becoming a big name himself, actually helped Hoard's campaign.
He did, yeah. Shared voter lists, advisors, an early alliance there. Hoard then won the general election against the Democrat James Morgan, becoming the 16th governor.
Serving one 2-year term from 1889, what were the key legislative points of his governorship?
Two main things stand out. First, the creation of the Dairy and Food Commission, a really early example of a state food safety agency in the U.S.
Okay, that sounds pretty positive, building on his background. What was the second?
The second was, well, much more controversial, the Bennett Law.
Ah, yes. This caused quite a stir. What exactly did it mandate?
Passed in 1889, it required children aged 7 to 14 to attend school in their local district for at least 12 weeks a year. But the kicker was the requirement that instruction had to be primarily in English.
And Hoard strongly backed that English instruction part.
He did. He saw it as essential for Americanizing the state's large immigrant population.
Wisconsin had a huge immigrant population then, especially German speakers, right?
Very large. German Lutherans, German Catholics. They had strong communities and valued their parochial schools, where German was often the main language of instruction.
So they saw the Bennett Law as a direct attack on their schools and culture.
Absolutely, an unwelcome intrusion. Hoard, on the other hand, increasingly framed it differently.
How so?
He argued these church schools were more about building congregations than making good American citizens, and positioned the law as upholding the separation of church and state, protecting public schools.
That's a pretty stark difference in perspective.
It really was. Opponents called the law paternalistic, heavy-handed. Some accused Hoard of anti-German bias. The state became intensely divided.
Religious leaders got involved.
Oh, yes.
Hmm.
Wisconsin's Catholic bishops publicly opposed it. Various German Lutheran synods condemned it. German-language newspapers campaigned hard for its repeal.
What about other immigrant groups? Scandinavians.
They largely opposed it too, mainly because of the requirement to attend school in their local district. It potentially limited access to their own fewer parochial schools where their languages might be taught.
So this Bennett law basically dominated the next election in 1890.
It was the defining issue, though there were some economic factors too, like the McKinley tariff. Hoard, maybe not being the most politically flexible person, stuck firmly to supporting the law.
And that cost him.
Big time. Many German Republicans switched to the Democrats. The Democrats swept the state, and Hoard lost the governorship to George W. Peck.
And the law itself was repealed soon after.
Very quickly. The new legislature repealed it in February 1891. But here's an interesting, sort of less-known outcome.
Yes.
Even though it was short-lived and repealed, the whole controversy apparently pushed many parochial schools to increase their English instruction anyway.
Almost preemptively to show the law wasn't needed.
Something like that. To show they could prepare students for American society without state mandates.
So after losing the governorship, Hoard goes back to publishing.
Right, back to the Jefferson County Union and, of course, the increasingly influential Hoard's Dairyman. Initially, he actually used his papers to support La Follette's rising career.
But that alliance didn't last.
No. Hoard became uncomfortable with La Follette's more progressive politics. He saw him as too autocratic, couldn't square some of the social policies with his own beliefs, and they eventually split completely around 1905.
And later in life, he served on the University of Wisconsin's Board of Regents.
He did from 1907. Helped establish a top-notch dairy herd for the university, helped get the livestock pavilion built. He resigned in 1911, though, reportedly over concerns about La Follette loyalists being appointed to the board by the governor then, Francis McGovern.
So bringing it all together, William Hoard passes away in 1918. What's the enduring legacy?
Well, he's undeniably seen as the father of modern dairying in Wisconsin. He truly spearheaded that shift from wheat to dairy, which fundamentally shaped the state's economy and identity.
And that legacy is formally recognized, isn't it?
Very much so. The state legislature declared his birthday, October 10th, William D. Hoard Day, back in 2010. There's a monument to him at UW-Madison.
And Hoard's Dairyman Farm itself.
Still incredibly famous. It's on the National Register of Historic Places, often called the most famous dairy farm in the world, a direct link back to his work.
So summing up, we've seen this journey from, early observations about soil through pioneering agricultural journalism, effective advocacy, and that quite tumultuous term as governor. A really complex figure.
Definitely. He left such a huge mark on Wisconsin's agriculture through his publishing, the WDA, his policy work. Even his controversial political stances had lasting ripples.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? About the sheer impact one person's focused vision can have on an entire industry, an entire state's identity.
Mm-hmm. And it also brings up those timeless questions, like the ones raised by the Bennett Law, about language, culture, education, and how societies navigate diversity and integration. Those debates were fierce then, and in different forms, they certainly haven't gone away.
A very relevant point. It shows how these historical struggles over policy and identity can echo through time.
Absolutely. Hoard's life demonstrates how personal conviction, combined with effective communication and organization, can drive massive change for better or worse, or perhaps more accurately, in ways that are complex and viewed differently depending on perspective. The consequences ripple outwards for generations.
Well, listener, we truly hope this deep dive into William D. Hoard's life has given you plenty to ponder. It's certainly been fascinating unpacking it all. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Deep Dive.
Yes, thank you for tuning in. Until next time, keep that curiosity alive and keep exploring. Farewell for now.